Welcome, everyone. Thank you for having me. Before we get started and share, hopefully, a little bit of insight into what a billion-dollar journey might look like, want to get a sense of the room. So who here are owners of their respective businesses? All right, great. And how many of you are CEOs or in the C-suite, so to speak, or maybe the management team? And how many of you act like owners or founders of the company, even if you're not? All right, that's important as well. So quick background, and then I'll share a bit about sort of the playbook of building, hopefully, a billion-dollar business. I had the pleasure of both meeting Jeremy and Brian, who are the fearless leaders of League Apps, at two very formative periods of my life. Jeremy and I met at Georgetown. I was a junior. He was a freshman. He was very precocious. You can sort of see that in terms of when you interact with him. But the interesting thing about Jeremy is I knew that he'd do amazing things. I was hoping I could hitch my star to him, and we had an opportunity to create businesses together a few years later when we both landed in New York. Brian was really the first entrepreneur that we brought on to develop a business within what we'll talk about as 212 Media. And he ended up, of course, becoming the CEO of League Apps and creating all of this success. And we're very fortunate to have him. So really owe a lot to Brian and Jeremy in terms of my own journey and in terms of the trajectory that I've been on, and hopefully I'm able to give back a few things in the next 15 minutes or so. Quick background. I began my career post-Georgetown on Wall Street. I worked for a few years, most importantly, with my oldest and dearest friend in the world, a guy named Vin. He and I had very weirdly parallel lives. His dad and my dad were classmates in college in India. They moved to Brooklyn when it wasn't cool to live in Brooklyn. They had us a month apart, and he was the closest thing I had to a younger brother. And so we knew that we were going to start companies. We had no idea what that meant in high school and college, but we figured if we landed on Wall Street together, that'd be a good sort of training ground for us. And so we spent a couple of years at a bank called DLJ. We fell in love with media, entertainment, technology. We left. We started a first software company at 24 years old, made every conceivable mistake in the book. We're able to exit that company and learn from it. And what we really did was to create a new concept in New York called 212 Media. The concept behind 212 is let's take all of these relationships we have in media, entertainment, telecom, and tech. Let's pitch them on businesses they should be building. And if we can find some opportunity for validation, let's create a new company where we serve as the founder, the funder, and the operator. And this was before concepts like Y Combinator or BetaWorks or 500 Startups. So in the mid-2000s, Vin and I and several other partners, including Jeremy, created 212. And we launched 4 businesses under the 212 Media umbrella. The first one became the largest music streaming platform in the world for Indian music content. That business was called Savin. It was acquired by a company in India called Reliance for $1 billion. The second business is the company that Brian and Jeremy operate today in terms of League Apps. The third is a company that I operate in early childhood education called Begin. And the youngest company in our portfolio is a company called LiftMetrics, which was then acquired by a company called Hootsuite 2.5 years ago to become the backbone of their analytics strategy. So we have seen a lot, and we've suffered through a lot. But hopefully we can distill some of those lessons down for you today. Before I begin, I'll mention just one analogy, which is when we were starting 212, I remember going to a panel where there was a woman who was a very successful entrepreneur of a magazine. And during that panel, she was giving advice, and she said, I would never wish upon my worst enemy the journey of entrepreneurship. And in that moment of hubris, I turned to my partner, Vin, I was like, she must not be a great entrepreneur. And the reality is that she was, and she was really honest. And the universe has caused me to suffer the consequence of that statement, because every day thereafter, it's been a constant struggle with both driving the business, staying afloat, and really achieving your goals. So with that said, what I'm going to do in the sports theme, which of course is the theme of today, is to talk about 5 core principles or lessons of scaling quickly. And to do that, I'm going to break this down, because we only have 15 minutes, into 3 chunks, or 5 chunks. The first is the archetype of the person that you need to be or have on your team to scale a business, some of the playbook that you should employ, very simply to do that, and then I'm going to leave you with each section one specific play as an example of something you might want to use or adapt, so it can become a little bit tangible. So the first archetype that all of you embody, and feel is that of the owner. And George Steinbrenner, favorite owner, I'm a big Yankees fan, he said, winning is the most important thing to me next to breathing, and I know a lot of us feel that way. So to be a good owner, what you effectively have to do is you have to be the chief visionary officer of your company. And there's 3 principles I like to point to. Number 1, your responsibility is to communicate a really powerful, clear, and concise vision for the future that you want to create. The future that you want to live in, and you want everyone that you are touching to live in as well. Steve Jobs, by the way, did an amazing job of talking about the future he wanted all of us to live in. The second is you've got to give your stakeholders, by stakeholders I mean your team, your customers, your partners, maybe your investors, ownership in that vision. You want them to be a part of that vision alongside of you. And the last thing is that you've got to use every opportunity you have to evangelize that vision. Through just force of will, talk about what it is that you're looking to create, whether it's a sports experience, transforming youth activity, challenging childhood obesity, whatever it may be. You're constantly evangelizing and telling people at every opportunity you get, in the recruiting process, in your town hall meetings, when you're meeting with your customers, this vision that you have. So an example of a play here is the Warren Buffett annual shareholder letter. How many of you have read Warren Buffett's annual shareholder letter? Anyone invest in the stock market? So Warren Buffett is known every year in Berkshire Hathaway to put out a letter which talks about the future of what he believes is investing. And it's a few pages long. It's a really powerful way at the end of the year to enunciate a retrospective of the current year and what you hope to create in the future. And you can use that as a tool to both gather your thoughts and be introspective, but to share with your team, to share with your stakeholders, share with your investors. It's something that we do at our company. It ruins my Christmas vacation, but it's really, really powerful in terms of really cementing a vision behind what it is that you believe is a future and how you're going to create that with your company. The second archetype or role is the general manager, a Brian Cashman type, a Billy Beane type. What does the general manager do to be successful? The general manager is your outward-facing chief recruiting officer. They are looking for talent obsessively. So 3 principles there is you're always, even when you don't have the capacity to hire, recruiting the best talent. You're going to industry conferences, you're on LinkedIn, you're meeting people, even if you don't have the need in that moment in time. In the back of your mind, you're saying, this person may be a great head of sales, a great head of business development, a great head of marketing, a great regional expansion opportunity for me. You're building those relationships far before you need them. The second is don't be afraid to pay for top flight talent that you can't afford yet. We all make the mistake as owners of what we call the warm body problem. Well, I'll solve that with a junior person, a warm body, we'll figure it out together. And then eventually when you actually hire that senior, seasoned executive, your business really takes off. We have made that mistake constantly and not hiring someone to lead a function and getting by with whatever we can do until that person comes along. You don't know what you don't know. And the reality is if you can hire top flight talent, always find an opportunity to do that. Develop your team into the most powerful recruiters for your organization. If you do a good job of building culture, your team is recruiting talent. Game attracts game. A-list talent recruits A-list talent. And so if you do a good job, your team is coming to you and bringing in people they've worked with previously as well. One play that I can share with you is called the simulation. So in sports, we benefit from the fact that you can see tape, you can do combines, you can see on television, you have scouting reports on how players do. You can't do that in business, but you can get close. And what we do is something called a simulation, where when we get a person through our process, we give them about 4 or 5 questions in a take-home exam. They got to prepare it, they come back and they present back to us. And that tells us a tremendous amount about that individual. It tells us how much effort and time they put into the exercise. It tells us a sense of what their work product is going to be, how passionate they are. It also tells us how well they interact with our team. It's a great process to both force that person to reveal a bit about themselves and the way they think and simulate how they're going to function. It also lets them know whether you're the right organization for them. Whenever we've gone through a simulation and someone has blown us away in that simulation, and hired as a result of that, it's never been a bad hire. And when we've sort of made some allowances or hired someone despite a mediocre simulation, we've always paid the price. It's a powerful way to be able to get a sense of who that person is going to be before you even hire them. The third role is the manager. This is the in-game tactician. This is the person that understands how to execute your playbook day in and day out. Casey Stengel said, finding good players is easy, try getting them to work as a team. Casey Stengel also said that the key to managing a baseball team is you take the 5 guys that hate you and you keep them away from the 4 people that haven't made up their mind yet, which I love as a quote. So the 3 principles of being a great manager, to be very reductive, is you've got to put the right people in the right roles as quickly as you can. Oftentimes you hire someone, you think they're good at something, you put them in a role, it's not that right role, and then they stay there, and they suffer and you suffer. Try to find, like a sports team, where you want to put that person as quickly as possible. Let them grow and flourish in that role. Be open to possibly amending and modifying what that person's actual job description is. Second, understand what motivates that person at their core, and then build that into their role and their compensation. Maybe they love getting out there and building a human connection. Maybe they love sales, and maybe they love the opportunity to be able to convince people. Maybe they love the idea of being a cultural ambassador and making everyone in your organization feel good. Maybe they just love self-actualization and learning and growing. In the interview process, as a manager, you've got to understand what really motivates them and make sure you incorporate that psychologically into their job description, give them opportunities to flourish, even if it's slightly outside of what their job description actually looks like. And finally, like a good coach, increase the complexity of your playbook over time. If you have a rookie quarterback, you're going to have a basic set of plays. If you've got someone like Aaron Rodgers or Tom Brady, sky's the limit. But Tom Brady and Aaron Rodgers didn't start with a complex playbook. They started with a playbook they could execute, and you give them more responsibilities over time. We oftentimes have a tendency to hire someone and give them a huge opportunity which is not yet commensurate to what they've proven. Grow that playbook over time. So a good play here is what I call the bottoms-up job description. We create a job description. Our companies change every 3, 6, 9, 12 months. We never revisit it. One of the things that we do to audit that process is we ask people to write their own job description at a moment in time, 6 months, 9 months down the road, and we tell them, tell me what you're actually doing, but then tell me how much time you're spending on those things and what you think the output is. And then you can see the disconnect between what you thought their job description is and where they're actually spending time. Forces them to be like, why am I spending 5 hours a week on this? And it forces you to say, I should really have them doing this instead. That bottoms-up job description in terms of what they're actually doing, time and results, is a powerful way to audit at least once a year how that individual is doing relative to what you think they're doing. Fourth role is the head of player development. It is the coach among coaches that gets the best out of the players and creates a lifelong learning culture. And the principles here is that we oftentimes give people a job description as to where they are today. We don't always tell them what their job description should be. If you have the time, write a current job description, but also write a future job description. Let them know that if they execute, they can go from X until Y. This gives them the aspiration of growing into that job. It also gives them a sense of what they have to do from a competency perspective to be able to get there. Second is invest in professional development. This is going to be expensive, but one of the things that we do at our companies, everyone at a management team level gets a coach. They meet with that coach like a therapist once every 2 weeks. And that way you are talking to people about the situational problems you have, and you're forcing yourself to be aware and to be guided in terms of your improvement. If your company is growing 50% a year, 100% a year, then your team should be developing and growing in terms of their skill set 50% or 100% a year. If the same person that was there 2 years ago when you were 25% the size hasn't grown, they're going to fail. Third is find mentors for your team. Very cheap to do this. Doesn't cost anything. Find individuals outside of your own organization that can be mentors and ultimately guide your team in a way that's independent of you, who is judging and deciding whether you stay or they go or compensating them. Give them someone that you admire or they admire that they can emulate, that can push them and give them context. A good play here is what we call the competency matrix. Again, we do a really good job as individuals and organizers and owners to be able to talk about a job description, but we don't tell them what it's going to take for them to go from director to VP, from VP to COO. Write a competency matrix that says, here's the things that you're doing well at if you're in your current job, but here's the things that you're going to have to do to get to the next level. That way, a person can start developing and training themselves to get to that level. Last role is the head of advanced analytics. This is your Bill James type. This is the person that just geeks out on being able to quantify and help you measure everything. So specifically, the 3 principles in this role or this function is you got to quantify everything. Famously, people have said that unless you can measure it, you can't manage it. So things feel qualitative and intuitive. You've got to distill it down into numbers. You've got to then help the team understand what the numbers are that drive the business. And finally, you've got to reward a culture that craves this level of objectivity. If you can't quantify it, you can't measure it, you can't manage it. So take everything you have in terms of your ideas and find what that core metric is. And a very simple playbook here is what we call the real-time dashboard. It's a scoreboard for your business. So for your business, if you're measured by the number of new teams that you're able to recruit, the number of players that you're able to serve, the amount of revenue that you generate in that quarter, or the amount of revenue per season, whatever that may be, create a scoreboard that allows people to understand whether you guys are succeeding or failing, whether you're in a slump or otherwise. And that simple visual tethers people back to a number and gives you a highly quantifiable sense of if you are, again, making the grade or not. By the way, I chose this image for the playbook because I did a search on great Washington Redskins plays, and I found this coaster that you can order of all the great plays that Washington Redskins have executed, and this is from 1992, which tells you that the Redskins, I'm a Redskins fan, have not had a good play for about 30 years. So maybe they should be here as well. Thank you guys, and I apologize it's so brief, but hopefully it helps.